Chapter 180. The man's name was Tuck, the woman's was Yino, and their coffee was the same color as the leather chair Alden sat in while they all had a casual conversation about recent events. The new span, real estate, luxury tax rates, it was all over his head and very far outside his day-to-day worries. But the chatter of the three older rabbits served to break up a long string of questions about him so that talking felt more natural than having one fell swoop of a personal interview would have. How much time did he expect to spend on the triplanets? No need to be specific, but was he planning one social trip or several? What were his priorities when it came to his appearance? And by the way, what did he usually wear in America? On Anzidora? What about at Leaf Song? Did he like what the school had given him in his human care package? Why? Why not? Did he think he had a style? Did he want one? All right, said Tuck as he poured the last of the coffee into Alden's cup. The cufflinks on the shirt he wore under the striped jacket were small gold compasses. Even though you're not a cultural novice, you are a beginner when it comes to presenting yourself through your wardrobe. You're hoping to work on that so that you don't feel inappropriate and unprepared around our tonans, and you like for your clothes to be functional. He waited. Yes, said Alden. That sounds about right. That's a good thing, said Yino. They were all in Needle and Wheedle's seating area, and she was beside Gus on the sofa. The window behind them was still curtained, and no sound at all came in from the street. When you decide to play around with fashion, and you might want to sometime, Anzidora is probably the best place on earth for having fun with how you dress. If you ever want to do that, we can help. But today you're buying clothes for the triplanets, and those clothes won't be toys. Tuck nodded. When people come to us for help with their off-Earth wardrobe, they are usually coming to us because they need tools. Even though you are looking for something to wear for personal matters right now, it sounds like it would be ideal if you could also wear it on some mornings. Just in case. We wouldn't give a surgeon a bat or a cricket player a scalpel. Showing up to a summons with an outfit that says the wrong thing can turn an event you would have enjoyed into a struggle. And none of us want to deal with that. If I get summoned, I want my clothes to blend in and say nothing, Alden said. Just neutral. Making no waves. That's too advanced for you. Greater than said Gus, setting his own cup in its saucer. Only a master can make his clothes unreadable. He's right, Yino agreed, smiling at Alden's expression. Just think of how hard it would be to make a random group of humans think nothing about your appearance. And that's when you have a lifetime of experience backing you up. On the Artonas, as an alien, you will draw half of all eyes. Those eyes will guess things about you whether you want them to or not. We can help you present the image you want, said Tuck. But we do it by making sure the clothes say the right thing, not nothing. It's actually easier with the Artonans in some ways. Humans pay attention to symbols when we notice them, but when it comes to clothes, Artonans are always looking for meaning. Most of them do it with humans, too. So if you give them a message they recognize to work with, it will be received. He walked over to a long set of shelves where lines of top hats and stacks of folded scarves were interrupted by more unusual accessories, and he put the coffee pot into a small cabinet. With that said, let's get down to it. You have a trip planned that you want clothes for. Who do you need to deal with on this trip? And what do you want them to think of you? Alden thought about it. Priority was the healer. So that first. And he wanted to look appropriate when he was hanging out at the art single quotage house. We can put you in something more generic if you prefer not to say what your personal business is, Yino told him. But just so you know, we dress people for everything. If you want our Tonans to give you more tips, if you want them to fire you without suspecting that being fired was your goal, if you're trying to look good for a wizard you like, or if your aim is to steal a job out from under another rabbit's nose, it's all the same to us. Nobody's ever asked us to make an outfit for a murder, but I know the perfect fabric for that. I won't be murdering anyone, I hope, Alden said. But that's good to know. The rabbit man is always prepared, Gus murmured. For everything. Alden glanced over at him. He was enjoying one of the fabric swatch books while he joked about the murder. A friend has gone out of his way to get me an appointment with a healer, Alden said. I want to hit the right level of formality and show I'm grateful for the opportunity. I might also be meeting members of my friend's family for the first time. They are fairly important people. I'll be wearing a commendation with this outfit. I was just going to use one of these instant embroidery packs I received recently, but if you're making the clothes from scratch, we can handle the embroidery, said Tuck. Given who the commendation is from, though, on significant occasions you should probably plan in advance and have it done on the triplanets. Or by your own hand if you can achieve good quality that way. Asking who did the stitching is a custom that can pop up from time to time. You already know about the commendation and who it's from. There was a groan in Alden's voice. Gossipy clients, said you-know. But even if they weren't gossips, everyone has seen you flying around on the general's disc. You were on the news. With a stained shirt, said Tuck. He was holding a hand to his chest as if the thought gave him heartburn. Line of asterisks. We're going to ask you so many questions, you-know said, and answering them will be fun. But first, the less fun one, your budget. Alden was relieved. He'd been concerned that this kind of shopping experience came with no discussion of prices until the bill was presented on a golden tray. And the conversation so far hadn't had many openings that invited him to say, "So what are you guys charging me?" He'd already used his interface to look up the cost of bespoke tailoring in the regular world and then tried to imagine how that translated. Needle and Wheedle had no website. Tuck and you-know were both rabbits. They both made clothes for wizards who were in a hurry, usually working together since they'd developed a business relationship solid enough for both of them to agree on complementary talent selection. Their magic would no doubt make the creation of custom clothes faster. Alden doubted it would make it cheaper. The consultation for people who were recommended by existing customers is free, you-know added. We're confident a busy young rabbit will need us eventually, so don't feel like you can't leave today without buying something. Or like you have to spend a great deal of money. I can help you pick one nice accessory before you go, or you can have a whole wardrobe. It's all fine with us. Alden looked at Gus. How much would you spend on an outfit for the triplanets? Clothes are one of my hobbies, he answered with a shake of his head. You don't have to make them one of yours. But you're obviously concerned with making the right impression, and you seem to be finding yourself in fairly important circles. Unless you have expensive tastes in materials, the cost of anything you have made by these two will mostly be the fee to pay for their knowledge, their spells, and their skills. If a client's budget is on the small side, Tuck said, we spend less time with them, and we use our powers more lightly. Maybe they only get to see a couple of outfit options on themselves before finalizing. Hearing that was actually helpful. I'm buying expertise, magic, and time from two of out who do get summoned regularly. So if I want to work with them, I don't pay like I'm shopping, I decide if it's worth it to pay like I'm summoning. He had never done anything like this. But he did want really nice clothes for being around Stuart's family. And it seemed like this might be fun. If he was going to do this, he wanted to do it right. He knew what he'd make per day on his own summons as a newbie rank rabbit working overtime for Leaf Song. If Alden had them exhaust their talents for him, he didn't know how much clothing that would provide, but the minimum fee had to be around what his own had been in February, right? Over $20,000 a day, he remembered. Around 7,000 Argold. Being an avowed is still crazy. There were C ranks, but there were two of them. And they had experience. What if I'm way off, and they charged 10 times what I'm thinking? Everyone was waiting so patiently for him to state his budget. I do have Stuart to fall back on for advice, but having their perspective on human-specific concerns could be great. Let's do it. Is 15,000 Argold a good starting place? He asked. For the one outfit plus whatever else? Or am I way off? 2 days Leaf Song fee. Plus more for materials and a side order of education. It's plenty, Tuck said easily. We'll take care of you today, have time for some finishing work tomorrow morning, and make sure you have everything you need to feel good about the trip on Monday. We might get halfway through an entire wardrobe for you for that amount or just the one outfit. It all depends on your choices. You did say there would be a lot of those. He was relieved that he'd named an appropriate amount to get the ball rolling and curious to find out what he looked like in clothes made just for him. I'm into choices these days. Not long after that, Gus went to buy everyone lunch, and Yanu left to raid stores for any little extras Alden might want to have that didn't need to be made from scratch. Apparently, everyone knew her, and it was normal for her to go collect things from shops all over the island, bring them here, and then take them back if they didn't suit her clients' moods. While the two of them were gone, Tuck was helping Alden narrow down his style preferences while images of well-dressed men and Artonans walked the entire length of the shop's back wall, courtesy of a projector drone. Don't think you have to match current Artonan favorite styles to make an outfit a success. If someone wants to wear a kilt or a three-piece suit to the Triplanets, we can make modifications to ensure that comes across the way they want it to. It can even be a conversation starter if the clothes are eye-catching in the right way. And avowedly Sung wore a French-made uniform with a ruffled apron. Something markedly different from anything wizards would likely have seen on other humans, dramatic enough to draw attention and invite questions, associated with serving the wealthy so heavily that even the briefest, laziest attempt to look up the significance of the clothes would lead people to conclude she was hopeful to acquire job offers. She was certainly making an effort. Tuck paused, then said, "How do you feel about jobs? Do you want wizards who see you and your new clothes to think you'd welcome their summons?" "I do not." Alden wondered if Tuck would comment on that. He didn't. "And you liked the red outfit we just saw while you were talking?" "No, the color reminded me of a coat I bought once. That was a very different shopping experience. By the way, what about the clothes from the rabbit's wardrobe? Wear them for the jobs they are designed for or because you want to take advantage of the nice little enchantments? Be aware that on their own, they are very recognizably work clothes to wizards who summon humans and to almost all Anasidorans. If you want to wear them without looking like a rabbit hoping for a summons or a RB single quotee on a summons, then you'll need to work on them or use them as an underlayer. How do you feel about color?" "I like indigo blue, like my messenger bag." Alden jerked his head toward the table covered in fabric samples and boxes. He'd left the bag in a chair over there. "But for clothes, I'm not picky. I don't usually wear neon." The red coat was uncomfortably red. "Yes, that's not one of your flattering shades. You can wear other reds well, though. Later, we'll show you how you look in different colors." The questions kept coming. Tuck was updating Yanoa while Alden talked. Alden was learning a lot about his own tastes, things he would have known if anyone had ever asked him to think about them, but how often did people ask you to think about this kind of thing? Until now, growing out of a pair of pants or admitting that his favorite t-shirt was approaching rag status had meant it was time to locate a replacement that fit his body well enough, and fit in with what everyone was wearing at school well enough, without costing too much. No fuss. There were clothes he kind of liked and clothes he didn't, and he never thought much about it after the decision to wear something had been made unless he realized he looked out of place or he felt physically uncomfortably. Now, he was thinking about all of it. He wanted people to think he looked good when he was standing right in front of them having a conversation. He didn't want them to notice his outfit from across the street. When questioned about what good meant to him, he had to talk for a few minutes before he found the answer, appropriate for the setting, like he'd made an effort without agonizing, mature but not in a way that sucked life out of his appearance. He liked when other people's clothes had an interesting detail or two that he wouldn't notice at a casual glance. He disliked conspicuous branding. "That's recent," he told Tuck while runway models stomped across the wall wearing a collection that was going for a hybrid menswear Artonanwear look. "I never cared enough to pay attention to that kind of thing, but then I found out some Artonans spend a lot of time trying to figure out what we are telling them with words on clothes. Now I can't stop reading people's shirts and overanalyzing them." He wanted his clothes to be comfortable and easy to move in. He wanted hidden pockets to hide preserved objects in. He wanted to be cool on the Triplanets, temperature-wise. Gustavo heard that as he came through the door with their lunches. We all want that. Being cool in that way isn't always doable, especially not on short notice or in every destination. But we try, said Tuck. Keep going. He didn't like loud patterns on himself. He thought he was probably in the early stages of developing a taste for magic jewelry. Every time he saw the green Nomagon ring on his finger, he liked the look of it more and more. He didn't mention his Oriot, obviously, but it was a contributing factor. When checking out Wizard's stacks of rings and bracelets, he usually liked the wooden pieces best. He was glad to hear that there were plenty of outfits he could wear that would be great on both worlds. He'd probably need to start taking advantage of that if he got summoned frequently. But when he had control over the situation, and his trips were planned, he would prefer a bifurcated wardrobe. Dedicated clothes for journeys to the Artonas. Once he made the decision, the fashion examples being projected onto the wall shifted to be even more triplanetary. Robes looked so comfortable, but Alden preferred pants. He liked that vest the Artonan walking through the park was wearing. It reminded him of one included in Stuart's belated message full of clothing examples. He liked most of those tunics except for the way they flared at the bottoms. He hated the necklines that made people's heads look like they were emerging from the top of a cabbage. Turtlenecks were fine. And, despite having shared several opinions that should render them unacceptable, he had a soft spot for Hawaiian shirts. All right, said Tuck, stylus lifting from the tablet he'd been sketching on for a while. Let's try some things on you. Line of asterisks. The dressing room had a pair of cushiony chairs and a beverage fridge full of 3 different kinds of water. The mirror showed Alden alternating views of his front, sides, and back while he stripped down to his underwear and redressed in a large jumpsuit that was made of numerous gray fabric strips in widths that ranged from vermicelli to linguine. Sympathy for magic made him want to stare at it for a little too long. There was a knock on the door. Would you rather do it back here or out front? Tuck's voice called. Here is fine, Alden called back. He was trying to be convenient, which turned out to be his first mistake of the day. When Tuck opened the door a minute later, he was carrying armfuls of the fabric swatches. He had to move them all for me. Gus poked his head around the door. Do you want me to go help empty the shoe stores? Or do you want me here? If you don't mind, a third opinion here would be awesome. But since you've introduced me to this whole thing now, I'm fine whenever you need to go. Good. Greater than I don't want to go. This is the fun part. He pointed at Alden. No giving up when the tickling starts. Straight face. You represent the Warren. Alden looked down at the jumpsuit. It's going to tickle. Not that bad, said Tuck, hanging his own coat on a peg by the door and taking a seat in one of the chairs. If you think of anything at all you want to try out, just say so. I'll let you know when we're about a third of the way through your try-ons. That's when we really need to start narrowing to make sure you've got an outfit ready for Monday. We can play around and make some more things for you once that's sorted. Pardon the goggles. He put the Sliampunky goggles on his face and became considerably quirkier looking. These help me see if any of the strands are damaged. It's so annoying for a fit to be off by a millimeter because one of them decided not to join the party. Are you ready? I'm ready. Alden turned back to the mirror and held his arms out slightly. He was curious to see the jumpsuit work. The effect it would have had been described, but he couldn't quite believe it would be as fully realistic as promised. Look at him holding nice and still with his arms out. Gus said, sounding thrilled about it as he took his own seat. Everyone stands that way the first time. Tuck was looking from his tablet full of sketches and references to Alden and back again. I think it's the natural starting position for a man getting his first magical fitting. Let's make it a good one. Outfit 1. Chatantan tunic, mid-thigh length, side split up to the hip. High neck tank for an underlayer with this one. Pants, straight-legged, minimal volume. He pointed at Alden while he spoke. Or, more accurately, at the jumpsuit, which started moving all over like every individual strand had a mind of its own. Alden saw his own expression of astonishment in the mirror. The strands slithered around one another and around him, forming the clothes as Tuck envisioned them and tickling like crazy, but in such a swift, unpredictable variety of spots that he just stood there unsure of which direction he wanted to flinch in. Outfitter, one of Tuck's skills. It would, according to him, do things to miscellaneous fabric strips, but it was designed to work with a special product for this specific purpose. When Alden decided he liked something enough to buy it, Tuck would set it into the suit with the skill. Alden would take it off, and Tuck would carry the linguine to the room where the clothes making actually happened. It would separate into the pieces he needed for a two-dimensional pattern. After the pattern was made, he'd return to Alden with a jumpsuit for whatever else they had time to design. Ino would be turning the pattern into clothes with her own skills. Some details would be added, and then they'd have final fittings and adjustments just to make sure nothing was amiss. Alden watched the clothes make themselves around him. "You guys," he said as the strands crawled up his neck. "This is so cool." There were now multiple pieces where before there had been a single suit. "It's instant clothes. Do you see this, Gus?" Gus was laughing. "There," said Tuck, lowering the finger he'd been pointing. "That's a starting place. Walk around. Take a good look at yourself. If you like the concept enough, we'll keep refining it. If not, we'll try something new. If you're not sure, we'll work on it a little and then we can take a few pictures for you to come back to later." "I can walk around." "You can walk around," he confirmed. "Even while I'm making adjustments if you want. Whatever you feel like seeing, just say the word. I'll tell you if I think it's a bad idea, but you're the boss." An experimentation is encouraged. Alden looked at himself. The pieces were gray, and some of the details had to be imagined for now. But it was undeniably a set of clothes that had sprung into being because he said he thought he might like to see himself in something similar. "It even fits right," he said in awe. "Oh no it doesn't," said Tuck, rising from his seat. "It fits well enough for you to get the idea." "Really?" Alden checked out his profile. "It seems pretty good." The difference between pretty good and perfect when it comes to clothes is the centimeter that looks like a kilometer. He stood behind Alden. "Want me to show you the difference?" "Sure." The outfit started to slither again, just a little. "You have shoulders that don't want to be done a disservice with a misplaced seam." The tunic's shoulders shifted minutely. Alden hadn't moved, but he had the impression that his posture had improved. His brows lifted. "You have a waist that can be respected even if the outfit isn't form-fitting." Another tiny adjustment around his torso. "And for something like this." Tuck gestured toward the tunic's hem. "There are specific lengths that suit a person. I think this is a little long on you." A tweak here, a tug there, pants closing in around his ankles. "What do you think?" Tuck asked. "I think this is an interesting new world I didn't expect to discover today. I think I have been missing out on seeing myself through a really neat lens." He smiled. "I think I want to try on so many outfits." Line of asterisks. Alden learned what he looked like. In 20 different necklines, in sleeves that scrunched or split or flapped. He tried out pants that had cuffs at the bottom that rose all the way to his knees and ones that looked similar to the style Rodin and plenty of other wizards favored. Excess fabric was very much a thing when it came to wizard pants. These were loose from the waist to the cuffed ankles, with a lot of the excess ballooning outward at the bottom. "I wore these so much on Thagund they feel familiar," he said, downing a small bottle of fizzy water that Gus had tossed him while he moved around in the current outfit. The pants were paired with a torso-hugging, long-sleeved shirt that had a neckline he particularly liked, a collar that rose up the back of the neck only, with the front opening in a shallow V. Completely uncovering the back of the neck could be read a lot of ways, but none of them were appropriate for introducing himself to someone he wanted to demonstrate respect and gratitude toward. But having the front open would be fine and a lot less annoying if he got hot. Neither Tuck nor Gus acted fazed by the Thagund mention. Not even for a second, not even a twitch. Gus was a counselor who saw every kind of drama that walked through the doors of the intake building, so that wasn't a surprise. He was a professional at acting like your backstory was only one manageable part of your life. Tuck was just as unflappable in a slightly different way. He never pried, and he took Alden's words at face value. When Alden told them he was expecting to make multiple social visits to his wizard friend's house, nobody asked who the friend was or if Alden was sure about their relationship being casual enough for him to wear whatever he wanted when it was just the two of them hanging out. Alden said he needed help looking like a respectable choice of companion in front of parents and siblings, and so that was what he got advice on. His appearance was Needle and Wheedle's business. Everything unrelated to it was entirely his own. He thought that was why the whole shopping experience was feeling very adult. The trick to wearing garments associated with the wizard class as an avowed is to make sure you're not wearing anything too close to the whole package, said Tuck. Right, said Alden. It's about not putting the fully educated wizard ensemble together. I like how comfortable the pants are, and I know these aren't even close to the most dramatic version. But I think I preferred the ones that were a little more toned down. What's next? He got more and more into it. They turned on the sound system and gave him the controls, but he kept going back to the instrumental playlist that had been the first offered. It sounded like happy, classy people getting dressed. When he liked a shape enough, Tuck would work on it for longer until they got the best version of it. Then it was thoroughly photographed and put in Alden's personal file, so that if he decided he wanted it, the look could be recreated more quickly. If Tuck was very familiar with a design or if he was looking at an image of it, he was better at pulling it together. With limitless options, Alden was worried he'd never be able to settle on anything, but when he saw the piece he wanted the commendation on, he was sure of it right away. This is a definite yes, he said, indicating the topmost layer of the outfit that had just finished coming into being around him. Can't I have one of these? A pezzo like the one you chose from the video of the park on Ortona 3, modified with your preferred neckline, the asymmetry exaggerated slightly. Intriguing but not showy. He smiled at Alden in the mirror. Definitely yes. You can have one. You can have more than one if you want. It's a practical garment you'll get a lot of use out of, I imagine. Let's see what it looks like in different fabrics and then figure out what you'll wear it with. Fabrics turned out to be way more important than Alden had realized. He didn't know what 90% of the ones he got to feel and talk about with the two of them even were, and apparently you couldn't just make anything out of anything and have it look nice. It was also time for them to discuss the budget again, because if he seriously wanted his pants to be made out of the silky stuff that magically chilled the air as it passed through, then he was going to need to get richer. We also don't have time to acquire that before Monday, said Tuck, taking the swatch away from him. I don't know why somebody felt the need to go get so many unrecommended samples from the shelves. Look, Alden, said Gus, passing him another one. This one changes color like a lizard. Gus got sent off to help but he wasn't gone for long. A couple of minutes after Tuck left to collect materials and create the patterns, the shopping team was back. Oh. Wow. Said Alden, back in the clothes he'd arrived in to greet them at the door. Did you leave anything for the rest of the shoppers on the island? A little. Said almost tripping over a plastic bag so large it dwarfed the other 7 hanging around her arms. I saw the pictures, I followed along with your plans, and I'm so jealous I couldn't be here to watch every bit of it. You're going to look wonderful. How are you on sunglasses? Don't worry. I've got you plenty to try on. All that back and forth to the cube, the glare off the water. Let's take care of you. Gus and Gretchen were right behind her with even more bags. Line of asterisks. So when you spend enough money all the stores come to you. Alden was staring at the wealth of stuff spread out before him. The goal, said Gus, who temporarily taken over in an advisory capacity while the tailors were in the back, is to find the perfect things to have with you at all times. These are probably not the perfect things. He waved his arms over a collection of toiletries piled on top of the coffee table. But you have to try a few times before you know, and this can be a practice run. On the Triplanets, how do you wear your hair? With dirt in it, typically. What's the easiest acceptable option? Alden asked. Gus handed him a bottle of something called Softly Salty. That wasn't quite enough of an answer, but he'd figure it out by reading the instructions on the back. There were so many other things to consider. Rows of shoes stood before him, fresh from their boxes. Shirts hung on racks so that he could browse through them at his leisure. Belts and hats and pajamas filled the sofa. All of it was in Alden's size. Like a pop-up store had appeared for a single person. Everyone assured him he could take all of it or none of it, or assign one of them to go on a hunt for whatever they might have forgotten. It was a mix of clothing that would work on the true planets and things he might want here on Earth. There was no need for his entire wardrobe to be bespoke. Yet, Gus had said enthusiastically when Yino pointed that out. Apart from the shoes, Alden would need to select to match his new triplanetary style. Most of these things weren't necessities. But it was definitely something to see it all here in front of him, and Yino had thought of things that were too small to have made Alden's list of concerns yet and offered solutions. House socks. A package of wipes that would handle any emergency sweat situations when he wasn't able to shower. A gum that would make your mouth taste like mint so strongly that other flavors didn't stand a chance. It was for helping people who loathed Wevy. He browsed, tried on a few things, and grabbed some silk pajamas that he just liked a lot before Tuck returned and took him back to the dressing room for another round of outfitting. The afternoon flew past from that point on. Clothes were appearing in the dressing room. Yino was asking Alden to do everything short of jumping jacks to make sure he was happy with the movement of the custom pieces. Then, they were trying what felt like 100 pairs of shoes on his feet. Then colors. Were all the colors all right? He couldn't catch his breath. Gustavo and Gretchen had to head to work. There were so many more bags to look through. Where did they keep coming from? Who the heck was that lady who just let herself in the front door, took something from a shelf, and then disappeared? Had the store been robbed? Oh look, another pair of shoes. And then there was calm. The skills that did the most necessary magics had been exhausted. The final adjustments to a couple of pieces would be made tomorrow. The mountains of clothes and products he had elected not to purchase were being folded and packaged away by Tuck while Yinu carefully displayed the few special outfits on mannequins. Alden stood eating a pack of roasted almonds that he couldn't actually remember anyone giving him and stared at his new clothes. Right at the end, Tuck had said, maybe something custom for home, too. You should have something you feel completely confident in no matter where you are. So Alden had asked for jeans that fit perfectly, a pair of dark wash ones he'd probably wear more than anything else he'd bought. He'd requested a casual button-down shirt and a coat that would make his shoulders look awesome. There they were on the mannequin. The jacket was a textured wool blend in a gray-green color. It was definitely nicer than his usual hoodie, and still relaxed enough to fit in at school when they were freed from the uniform requirement in January. Yino had shown him how to dress it up or down. The next mannequin was wearing a Triplanet's ready look. Nothing too fancy from a distance. The brown, long-sleeved turtleneck didn't have that shiny quality that made him uncertain about the Leafsong turtlenecks, but when someone stood near him they might notice the occasional metallic burgundy thread in the fabric. The piece was intended to extend his clothing options. With the high neck, it could be worn just about anywhere, by itself, if either of his two new pazivas were unavailable or inappropriate. The mannequin was wearing the shirt with a pair of pants in a desaturated dark red. They were similar to Rodin's in shape, but with the amount of blousing fabric toned down a couple of notches. And, finally, there was the outfit he'd wear on Monday. Pazivas were vests as far as Alden's limited sartorial vocabulary was concerned. They were a sleeveless outer layer that opened in the front, and they didn't extend down to your ankles or anything, so, vests. One of the things that made a vest an Ertonin Paziva was a closure that ran diagonally across the body, rather than straight up and down. Another was the fact that the shape of it left the waist and hip on one of the wearer's sides free. You could carry pouches or tools you needed easy access to there without belting over the garment. The front of the other hip was concealed by the vest's two tails, which fell in triangular points over that thigh. Alden's Paziva was modified according to his preferences. They usually had no collar. His had one in the back that rose in a slight curve over his neck, with a V in the front. It was the same shade of brown as the shirt on the other mannequin. He'd always thought he looked good in brown. Apparently, He did, but there were specific browns. This one would be his neutral extraterrestrial wardrobe color. The vest could have had all sorts of closures, but he'd chosen to have no visible one. Instead, he'd picked a very secure fastening strip. It was an enchanted product, but not too expensive. And it allowed him to adjust the position of the two sides of the vest to suit his taste and the quirks of whatever he might wear underneath it. In the place on the chest where a button might have gone on some versions of the outfit, he could wear some kind of accessory pin. Or he could leave it empty and let the commendation be his only statement. The placement of the commendation was one of the only aspects of the whole process where Alden had knowledge that outmatched the professionals. They had wanted to put it firmly on the front, just above the position where a logo or name tag might go on human clothes. But Alden had talked for entirely too long about placement with the nephew of the person who'd actually issued the commendation, so he was adamant that wrapping a larger piece of embroidery over the top of one shoulder was fine. The fact that the commendation was only partially visible from the front was balanced by the fact that it was also visible from the back. The wrapping around of the symbol said it was very significant to him, and that was hardly a bad thing to say considering who it was from and who he'd be interacting with while he wore it. "It's like I'm clothing myself with the honor," he'd explained to Tuck. "As opposed to displaying it. It's a thing. I checked." They had trusted him to know his business once again and had put it there. The thread they'd used was almost the same color as the cloth. That was largely personal taste. He liked the way it looked, and since it covered the whole shoulder, there was no risk of it being too subtle. This pezzuva could also be worn with the shirt and pants on the other mannequin because the goal had been to give him triplanets pieces that all worked together. But on Monday, he'd be wearing it with a pair of brown pants that looked like the joggers from Leaf's song had gotten a fabric and fit upgrade. They were minimal enough not to detract from the vest, which he would be wearing with a lightweight shirt in a shade he thought of as brown purple, though it had some more elegant-sounding name on the color chart. As an alternative, he had an indigo blue tank top he could use as an underlayer when he wanted to wear the vest sleevelessly. If he did that, he would end up with a triangle of blue showing just at the waist on one side, and his arms would be free to cool off. That was his personal favorite of all the options. "This is a gorgeous hang to it," said Yino, running her hands over the front of the vest to fasten it around the mannequin and then touching the 2 points that came down sharply in the front, one slightly longer than the other. "The softer pezzuva we're finishing up for you tomorrow will have a beautiful drape, but I like that you wanted to try this more structured version. When it holds its shape like that," said Alden, "it reminds me a little of origami." Line of asterisks. It was time for last touches. A table was set up in front of the Monday mannequin, with Artonan jewelry and belts and scents. "Your clothes are conveying a lot of the things you want," said Yinu. "Comfort and familiarity with the culture. Respectfulness. Confidence in yourself. The commendation is loaded with meanings that would be impossible to avoid even if we tried, and they are not meanings that tarnish you. That's for sure. But let's shape your message a little more. In the near future, you should collect some pieces that are the exact right thing for you. What we keep here in the shop isn't really personalized, they are just items we think will be useful to many avowed." Alden looked through the accessories slowly, talking about what each one would imply to anyone who noticed it. She'd curated them for him, so none of them were wrong. But it did make him curious about what other things he could manage to signal with a simple ring or belt buckle. "What if I have something made out of my birth tree?" he asked. "What does that say?" She lifted an eyebrow. "I don't actually know that one. We have a symbology expert we call when people have a question like that. But he is a wizard, and it's expensive. Unless you've got a piece of your tree to use right now, you might just want to wait and ask your friend." "I'll do that." There was no need to take advantage of all of the supplies arrayed before him. Just a couple of right things. "This," he said finally, pointing at a brooch that would go on his vest. "And these." "The synvaseed for a pocket offering," she said, opening the jar that held the scrambled dandelion-looking things. "We'll put them in a pouch with the gratitude logogram on it. How many do you want?" "A dozen." "That's a lot. You might not even meet a wizard who uses them for anything." pocket offerings can get a bit stale while you wait for the opportunity to give them away. "I know one," said Alden, the familiar basil smell of Stuart's preferred cushioning spell filling his nose now that the lid was off the jar. Without further comment, she tucked them into a leather pouch, then she reached for the brooch in a box to put it in. "Good choices," she said. The brooch was a piece of driftwood carved into a symbol that combined the logograms for happiness and rest. The driftwood represented long travel, so Needle and Wheatle carried various accessories made from it, since Avowed and the Artonas were definitely travelers. Wearing the pin would tell everyone that Alden wasn't hoping they'd offer him work. It had the side benefit of matching up well with his visit to the mind healer. He was happy to have her help and hopeful for better rest. "Simple," said Yin-Oh. "Sophisticated. Done." She tapped the box that had the driftwood jewelry in it. "Are you satisfied with everything? Any last requests?" He looked at the outfits on the mannequins and the bags that held the store-bought extras. Needle and Wheatle now had a file on him. Future appointments would be easier according to Gus, because he would grow into his sense of style now that it had been allowed to see the light. And he wouldn't have to learn how the process worked from scratch. He had been assured that Tuck was even better at tuxedos. "I'm drawing a blank," said Alden, looking back at Yin-Oh. "I think I wanted to ask you guys for a few more things, but now my brain is fried. You had to make a million choices in just a few hours. It's tired." She walked over to the mannequin in the coat and jeans and started stripping it. "It will all hit you at some point. You'll open your closet and realize how the things you bought today are, and you'll be glad we made you try on 40 pairs of leather boots. I'm sure it was twice that many. My feet are now boot-shaped. Think of how fast it would be next time if that were true." She looked back at him. "We'll deliver all of this to your dorm so you don't have to carry it. Do you have plans for tonight?" "Not really. I missed the first-year dinner slot at the cafeteria, so I'll probably grab something before I head back to campus." She held up the coat. "Want to look handsome while you do it?" Line of asterisks. "I like this." Alden sat outside a restaurant, at the last table they'd had available. It was getting dark, so he had taken off his new sunglasses and set them beside the basket of bread that had come with his Mets platter. The glasses were dark green. Just a color he had selected because he liked it, and a style that had been recommended by Yin-Oh because she was taking his face shape and his preference for chill, beachy ones into account. "I like that everything I'm wearing had so much thought put into it." He'd been carefully studying what every other person around him was dressed in. Variety and bold choices weren't lacking in Apex. There was a woman in a coat that had light-up sleeves, and there was a man wearing a lot of something that looked like alligator skin. A simple black dress. A neon orange windbreaker. A pair of pants that looked like they'd been picked up from the Triplanets and then decorated with a bunch of straps. Alden didn't think he'd be drawing attention for his sense of fashion, and he was glad of that. But if someone did happen to look his way, then it was satisfying to feel like he'd taken some control over what they saw. And if nobody looked his way, he was quite happy sitting here enjoying all the little unimportant things that were only for him. The buttons he'd chosen out of way too many possible options. The fact that instead of a tag, his own name was inside the bespoke coat, shirt, and jeans. The extra pockets they'd managed to hide for him everywhere, most of them with closures secure enough to guarantee any untrusted items didn't get lost even if someone hung him upside down and shook him. The day had been so far outside his normal. But I think it was really good. I think it's something I'm allowed to enjoy. He requested to-go packaging from one of the server carts this place used and boxed up all the food he hadn't finished. Then he grabbed his bag and headed out. When he made it back to the dorm, Lexi and Hoyu were both out. Alden hung his new clothes up carefully, climbed into his loft bed for the first time in what felt like forever, and fell asleep before either of them made it back. Chapter 181. The timer Alden had set through his interface went off, but he dismissed the flashing light with an irritated thought and went back to staring at the page in front of him. Focus yourself on calling the memory of light toward the symbol of the lantern, concentrating on the centermost point of the shape. Hold command at that point while returning your ori out to the release pattern of your choice. Some may be able to allow the ori out to fall for this spell, but having studied many castings, I deem it more effective to. His second timer sounded. It was his tablet playing a series of especially annoying chimes at high volume, and he'd put it all the way across the room on top of the loft bed so that he'd have to move to get it. Alden set down Wantel's art and stood from the learning cushion, hurrying over to make the racket stop. When he pulled himself up into the bed far enough to grab the tablet, he saw the note he had stuck to the front, hearing off. I mean IT. I really don't trust myself at all, do I? Once he had turned off the alarm, he pulled the clay spiral free of his lobe and placed it carefully on the desk. With his mind only mostly stuck in his book, instead of entirely lost, he could see the signs of the day he'd had all over the room. Dirty clothes from a workout at North of North this morning, a smoothie cup from breakfast, the plate he had eaten his lunch on, his books. His learning cushion had been brought over from Matadero yesterday before his meeting with Jeffy. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Alden had done nothing but exercise, eat, and learn his new flashlight spell. A completely fantastic day. But he had a couple of errands to run, and he was expecting a delivery soon. Or right now, he thought as a text from Yano arrived. He asked the system to store his book and consoled himself with the knowledge that he was probably past the reading stage anyway. Thanks to the earring, he was sure he'd gotten the details down. Now he just needed to take the spell all the way to the end and see what happened. That would be his reward for taking care of everything else he needed to do. He stepped out of his room to find the apartment quiet, as it had been all day. Lexi was spending Sunday with his family. Hoyu had only been in and out a couple of times. The slow cooker was plugged in now, so something was going on there. Alden was afraid it might be all the Thanksgiving leftovers together. Concoction Hoyu had mentioned trying out the night before last. And Luke's door was shut. Alden assumed if his roommate had returned home, he would have said hi. How long is he going to stay gone? Occasional glances at the headlines made it look like Alaya was taking a beating, but there were also people who were very into her new persona, one besieged original avowed, dedicating her life to getting to the bottom of what had really happened and finding who was out to get her and her beloved Anzidora. Her stunt with Orpheus and divesting herself of a bunch of property was clearly the start of whatever this was. She had announced yesterday that she'd be giving frequent updates on her findings from mission headquarters on board Libra, and she'd put out a call for people to apply for jobs on her new truth-finding task force. Then she'd shared a statement, purportedly written by Hazel, that implied she had been pressured in some way by Jacob and his mysterious Sal connections to bring him with her to that birthday party. The statement didn't actually say anything useful or concrete, and the kicker was that Alaya read it aloud like she had serious doubts about Hazel's honesty. The waters were so muddy that it was impossible to say whether it was all for show or if she was embarking on a real detective phase. But a lot of people were unhappy with the system, the Triplanets, and the Anisidran government, saying the destruction seemed to be the result of one individual's unpredictable decision, and those people liked the idea of a powerful person chasing after a different answer. Nobody else seemed to be throwing themselves and their money in that direction as dramatically as Alaya Vlora was. Those people who don't believe the official story should be the most doubtful of her, but she's the only one giving them what they want. How does that shake out in the end? He thought Lute should probably stop exiling himself. But he did understand. As soon as Alaya had started talking about Hazel and the party, Alden had held his breath at the thought that his own name might come up. He'd been glad that if it did happen, he had permission to hang out at Matadero where no humans or drones could get to him. To reach the street where Yano's driver had parked, he had to take a short jog, and she met him just before he got there. She was walking at a remarkable speed for someone in such high-heeled shoes, her white trench coat flaring out behind her. "There are a couple of things in the trunk," she said, lifting one of the garment bags she was carrying. "Black car. I'll grab them." In the trunk, Alden found the shoes he'd bought yesterday, boxed and bagged, along with a gift wrapped in blue with a big gold bow. He almost left it because he assumed it must be something Yano or the driver had with them for someone else, But he looked closer at the small attached envelope, just in case, and saw his own name. "Oh, thank you for your business gift." He shook it curiously a couple of times before he closed the trunk and went to join Yin-Oh. "It didn't weigh much. You didn't have to come all the way personally," he said when he'd caught up to her. "A courier would have been fine." "I'm here in case there's anything wrong with the order," she replied. "There isn't, unless Tuck and I both lost our minds without noticing it this morning. But if you have time now, you can look over it all and make sure it's right. I'll fix any poor fits or fetch any missing pieces. Or you can call us whenever you need us." Back at the dorm, he led her upstairs and invited her to take a seat on the sofa while he carried everything to his room. She looked out of place there, but no more so than a shirt he had. And he did think checking over all of the important stuff was the right thing to do. He went through it quickly, tried on the second Poziva they'd finished up for him last night, and decided everything was exactly what he'd asked for and expected. Then he took the gift with him back into the living room. "It's all perfect. I appreciate you both helping me on short notice." "That was nothing," said Yin-Oh. "Our waiting list tends to be long this time of year thanks to all the holiday parties coming up in the next couple of months. But a lot of clients had to reschedule this week. Given the circumstances." "Makes sense." He held up the gift. "Should I open this while you're here?" "Whenever you want is fine. It's just a small way to say we're glad to have you as a customer. If you try it on, we can make sure it fits. But it will. I adjusted it a little for you." Alden tore the paper off and opened the box to find a teal shirt covered with a palm tree print. "A tropical shirt. You did say you enjoyed them." She rose to her feet. "That should be fine to wear on the triplanets, by the way, if you are doing something light-hearted and fun. It will look very celebratory and earthly. But it should be a hit at parties because of that. And of course they'll like the trees." "Thanks. I think you made excellent decisions yesterday," she said as she headed to the door. "Of course it's great for me to sell you clothes, but on a personal level, I do like to know a young rabbit is taking care with how they handle themselves out there." She was sliding her feet back into her heels. "Making it clear that you are not disconnected from the world of wizards, as new avowed often are, is good. There are some summoners who will treat you much more generously if you look like a person who might be sitting down for a chat with one of their colleagues next week. Your commendation sends that message better than Tuck and I ever could. But you won't always be wearing it, and it can't hurt that when you do, you wear it on something that makes it look like you know your way around their circles." "Yes," said Alden. "That sounds pretty right." Yin-Oh opened the door. "Have a good afternoon. And call us anytime." Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. How do I beat an A-rank speed brute who's already been punished once for underestimating my skill? Half an hour after the meeting with Yin-Oh, Alden was pushing a cart down the aisles of the right shop, restocking on cordage and rope for class while he tried to figure out how to accomplish Max's request. Though it pained him to admit it, Winston probably wasn't stupid enough to self-decapitate again. At least not that easily. It would have to be a less obvious method to work. He's probably obsessively reviewing all my gym footage to plan out how he's going to give me a healing or some shit like that, too. So nothing I've done before will surprise him. One possibility was upgrading his toolbox. He could go for an uncommon material that Winston really wouldn't be able to see well enough to handle. Something much thinner than the fishing line, maybe with special properties. But he didn't want to. Beating Winston with a filament of enchanted spider silk or something would be pretty unfair unless the speedster was allowed to bring his own exotic weapon to the duel, and at that point, they'd just be fighting to see who could buy the best toy. A cough from behind him made him realize he'd zoned out. He apologized to the woman who wanted to get to the shelf he had been blocking and moved out of her way. Winston has to get close to kill me. And he's fast, but he's not Finley. Or even Medi. Maybe if I practice a little before we duel, I can actually be a threat to him with something fairly simple. Finishing up the cordage restock didn't take long. When he was done, he headed to the vending machine that sold temper spheres and bought 3 cartons. For experimentation purposes, not for MPE. He wanted more practice pulling enchantments. Breaking the locking mechanism on the puzzle door at Apogee Artist Spaces could have been a lifesaver, but it had taken him precious seconds. He needed to get better at it, and he might as well make the practice do double duty. He would learn what every single enchantment on the temper spheres did, and he would try applying different combinations of them to other objects, hoping to discover something useful. Making a cat toy hard to see for a few seconds wasn't the best he could do, surely. Browsing the other vending machines for any cheap enchanted things he could break made him wish a tiny bit that he'd taken a couple of the rings from the cottage at the art single-quote house. But most of them were so much more useful there, serving their intended purpose as convenience spells for non-wizard guests and knights who didn't want to cast after affixations. Alden would just pay for this part of his education himself. He stopped in front of a machine that held enchanted accessories, mostly rings and bracelets that he imagined were useful for rites working with sensitive or dangerous materials. He knew they'd be wildly expensive before he even checked the prices because the machine looked like it belonged in an amusement park instead of a professional environment. That was a trend he had noticed on past trips to the store. Sleek, serious-looking machines held the more common items. But if he found one that had a sign that said Mr. Blingy on top, and it was covered in flashing lights, then even the cheapest thing in it probably cost more than he'd spent on and Tuck services yesterday. Alden assumed Mr. Blingy did something both painful and humiliating to anyone who messed with him. He looked through the rings more out of curiosity than a desire to be in possession of any of their effects. None of them were made of the same translucent green material that the nonagon and its ring were crafted from. And though a couple were dark silver, they didn't have the geometric patterns carved into them that Joe's did. Rodin. He wished hadn't drawn his attention to the idea of summoners treating a person differently because of their perceived connection, or lack thereof, to wizard society. It was obvious. Or it seemed obvious now. But it made him wonder again about Rodin, and what the wizard had been thinking during the time they spent together in his office, and what Alden might have missed or misunderstood. It's over. I'm totally done with him now. Just let it die. His questions weren't ones he could unravel with the information he had, anyway. Back then Rodin claimed to have thought Alden was sent by his enemies as a trap, then to have decided that he was a stroke of good fortune. He thought I must have some kind of wizard benefactor on Earth, one who told me what skill to pick without contracting me. A reckless one without any proper discretion, or one so powerful they could just do whatever they wanted without fear of consequences. Someone interesting, who liked Alden enough to talk to him but not enough to really teach him, hire him for a long term, or monitor him. What did he think? Maybe that I was a way to connect with that powerful person? Or blackmail material he could use against them one day? Or a valuable thing that the powerful person had created and then abandoned on a whim. At just the perfect time for Rodin to pick it up? And he even offered to give me a long-term job himself, there at the end. In a year or so, he said, after he'd squirmed back into everybody's good graces. Wasn't he afraid of pissing off my mysterious benefactor? I guess he thought I was really on my own. Or maybe that he could manage any wizard out there, if he had enough time to plan. He told himself, again, to let it go. In only the few days Alden had spent with him, in just the moments Alden had seen him, Whirly Rodin had rubbed shoulders or bullied, it was kind of hard to tell which it was in some cases, multiple important wizards. The parents of everyone he'd helped out of the mission situation. All those people he'd been gifting potions to left and right at the party. Rodin was a smart, talented, energetic doer of illegal things. Alden's chances of really understanding what the professor had once thought of him and planned for him, when the guy wouldn't even talk to him anymore, were lower than low. Brooding was stupid. In an attempt to snap himself out of it, he reached into his bag to grab his tablet so he could take a picture of Mr. Blingy. He had no clue what Kibby would think of the vending machine, but she'd surely have at least one hilarious opinion. She'd be so upset if she knew how angry I was with him. And at least him using me got her out of there. And most of the others. He had told Rodin, during that first phone call after he'd made it home, that he didn't think he'd made a bad gamble. What else was he supposed to do under the circumstances? If they'd had one more day, one more minute, before everything went wrong. Alden hoped whoever made decisions for the Apollo Corporation saw Kibby's explosion in their dreams every night. He snapped the picture of the Mr. Blingy machine. After saving it to add to a message for Kibby, he sent the image to Bo. "This is the poison dart frog of vending machines," he wrote. "Its vibrant exterior is a warning. What are you sending me that for? Because I know you like frogs now. I don't like frogs. Don't be like that. They were there for you when you were wearing nothing but fronds." By the time he finished escalating the dart frog jokes, he was back on the street, heading for his next stop. And he was so busy laughing at Bo's replies that he'd completely let go of chewing over the things that he wanted to leave behind him for good. He was thinking about how he could make the frogs a recurring topic. But a really infrequent one. So that Bo was never expecting it. He was thinking about how funny it was going to be when he found an opportunity, months or years from now, to put a toy dart frog in front of a toilet, so that Bo stepped on it when he went to take a leak. A perfect reenactment of his Amazon adventure. And then, some subconscious process he hadn't been aware was running produced an answer about Rodin and himself that he'd never even asked it for. It wasn't shocking. It was so clear that he knew it was true, and at the same time, so unwanted that he tried his best to make up reasons it might not be. He walked through blocks until he reached a neighborhood he hadn't seen yet in a place he'd only read about online, a tall, egg-shaped building where you could learn about life shaping in agriculture. And pay a fee to enjoy a pick-your-own-produce experience. He bought the largest available basket from a man who spoke Mandarin, and wandered the winding interior paths, admiring the verdant trellises and a ballet of silent drones misting plants and moving containers. The place was busy but so well designed and managed that he often found himself in an area that felt like it belonged to him, tucked away between towers of peppers or surrounded by logs covered in mushrooms. He spent a while selecting fruit in a long pergola corridor where frames held up a roof of kiwi, grape, and tomato vines. It was worth the price of admission for sure. But his thoughts were still twisting and turning, looking for a way to get away from the truth. I can't. It's too basic. To everyone else who knows what happened, all this time, it must have been like blue skies and wet water and hot fire. I should have known. If I didn't know at first, I should have figured it out so fast. The first time I saw that humongous lab after the mission. During something smacked into his leg. He took a startled step to the side, and looked to see that he'd been joined under the tomato arbor by a little boy with dark hair and light-up shoes who was too short to reach the vegetables. Very focused, though. He swiped at the overhead vine with the basket he'd just accidentally whacked Alden with. When swiping didn't work, the little guy went for a jump and swipe move that had the potential to knock down tomatoes if he improved his execution. Though Alden did not like the tomatoes' chances of remaining intact when their harvester was beating them with wicker and stomping around. "Do you want me to get some for you?" The kid gave him such a shocked look that Alden wondered if he'd somehow failed to notice that he wasn't alone. He stopped jumping and unclipped a chunky, panda-head keychain from his belt loop, then stared at the small screen on the front. It took longer than it should have for Alden to figure out that it was a translation device. "I'm big enough to do it myself, greater than the boy answered confidently. Alden nodded and ignored the jumping while he picked a couple more tomatoes. Some people, he thought as he headed back to campus with all his shopping in a full basket, are big enough to pick their own berries. Rodin might really be way over his head now, but back then, he was tattooing the heirs of important families and smoking hookahs with their parents. He was laughing it up in golf carts. The lab they took from him was massive. He had like 50 assistants at one point, and a lot of them were geniuses. Even fallen from grace, he was still so damn talented that they let him torment students at the second most prestigious school on the true planets as punishment for his crimes. When he acted like I was his one and only way of helping his assistants, that was just a lie. He took a deep breath. Whirly Rodin was big enough. So why was Kibby still on Thagund? Why were the rest of them there? Why was I? Line of asterisks. That night, despite his high expectations, casting the flashlight spell didn't go well. He knelt on his learning cushion and tried until his authority was exhausted, until he felt like he was a feather trying to penetrate through concrete instead of someone who could sometimes ask reality to shift for him. His hands and his authority had moved well. He thought maybe he'd misunderstood something about the calling the memory of light part, which was slightly different from anything he'd been asked to do in other spells. His focus was off, maybe. Or his memory of sunlight spilling through his bedroom window wasn't what the spell meant. Perhaps it was the turmoil of his thoughts this afternoon, still messing with him despite his efforts not to let them. One of those, he hoped. There was always that worry in the back of his mind that a spell wouldn't happen for him because of his species. Calling the memory of light could be advice for someone whose brain worked differently. Unhappy and unsettled, he climbed to his feet and stripped off the silk pajama pants he had been wearing while he practiced. He took them and the cushion over to the huge suitcase lying in front of the window, where its bulk was keeping the bottom of the blackout curtain pressed against the wall, and added them to everything else he'd carefully packed earlier. After he'd zipped it back up, he stared at a particularly large rip that Stuart had repaired with one of his silver patches. Tomorrow morning. First, a flight to Matadero. Then, a teleport to the Art single-quote-H household. Then, a trip with Stuart to meet the healer. The nerves were beginning to bubble up again. I need to put myself to bed before I talk myself out of going. He did, and to keep himself in bed for at least a few hours, he took his opposite stone with him and performed the megaklutz half of my body becomes my assistant. He laid down, careful not to bite his tongue or smash some part of his body into the wall, and waited for his opposite to notice. Hey, there, he thought when the crystal checker started glowing a few minutes later. Whoever you are, I'm really glad you're all right. It took him a very long time to sleep, but at some point, the dark of his room turned into the deeper darkness of a moon that orbited the planet Kimner. The lights of the lab were so far behind him, and he had the impression that he was running into an abyss that clawed at him from every direction. There was nothing in front of him but bare, chaos-ruined dirt. And even that was a fuzzy gray view that he was afraid of losing, despite his promises to Kibby that he could easily find his way back to her if the goggles she had made for him failed. The lab lights are so bright, I'll be able to see them from a very long way away, he'd assured her. But he'd worried, as he always did, about 100 things he'd never say. If I fall, she won't be able to come help me. If now is the time when the lab lights give out. If the thing that made the trails in the grass comes while I'm out here. If by some miracle I make it back with a car, but she is not strong enough to make it to the next sunrise. One step after the other anyway. There was nothing else he could do. When he finally found the car, the pieces that had once been her father and wife were so light in his hands and so heavy in every other way. Kippy wanted the bodies of her family to be completely gone, and so they would be when Alden brought the car back. Nobody but him would ever know how many pieces there had been. Or how he had tried to pull some of them free of the mutated grass that had found its way through them only for them to break apart. The way he'd wanted to hurry and be careful at the same time. The few heartbeats spent holding a portion of a small skull, wondering what the right way to treat it even was. He had driven toward the lab and left them back there with only the dark for their grave. That night was long past and far away, but it was somehow right next to him and all around him when he woke in his room with Chelena North. One of his hands was cold and locked like a vice around the railing that was supposed to keep him from rolling off the loft bed. It had to be close to morning because when his feet hit the floor, he didn't fall all over himself. The word chain had run its course. But his room was as black as his dream, and he stood there, almost disoriented, worry out sliding down over his hand to entangle itself with his fingers. He remembered how it had been coiled into the logogram for Friend when she gave it to him. Right after he made it back from the trip to get the car. This is your present for returning safely. You will use it your whole entire life and be the best avowed. Everything was so close to impossible, thought Alden, breathing hard, his face pointed toward the spot in the darkness where his feet should be. Everything was almost death. I could have started a fire with the promise stick lighting spell, But out there on Thagund I would have had nothing but my own clothes to burn. A flashlight that couldn't be lost, that would be his forever. Wherever. As long as he could cast. One small thing that made the impossible a little less so. He started casting again, his aura moving, his authority moving. To be a wizard is to move through reality with true awareness of your own freedom. The theoretical pinnacle of wizardry is dominion. Over the self. Over the universe. He didn't try to call the memory of light toward the symbol of the lantern because there was a slightly different thought, more deeply felt in that moment. A shift in desire and perspective. I don't want to call the light right now, he thought, lifting the ori out as if he were about to shoot a square of force at an enemy. I just want the darkness to fuck off. He held that idea in his head, dropped the strands that transformed the lantern symbol into a spell release shape, and claimed his dominion over this one small matter. Not an exhausted feather now, but a freshly determined battering ram. The room lit up. It was less flashlight and more flash. One so bright that Alden actually saw almost nothing but the whiteness before his authority was spent and he was in the dark again. He stood there, caught in a state between euphoria and panic. He'd just done a new spell. Yeah. And also he was blinded and his skin stung and he smelled burning hair or dust or something. He managed to fumble his way toward the light switch and slap it, and then he had a minute of real panic because his vision was still definitely impaired. After a lot of probably detrimental blinking, it went back to normal, and he walked around the room taking stock of it all. It still smelled kind of crispy and wrong, but there was no smoke or singed spots that he could find. He peeked out of the blackout curtain and didn't see anyone pointing up at his window. He listened and didn't hear Hoyu banging around like he'd been woken up. He seemed to have gotten away with it better than Soren had. Okay. That was one way to do the spell. Not the best way. But I made magic. I called light to fuck up the darkness. That means I can call it in a more controlled way, too. He dug his toes into the rug and smiled. Chapter 182. Alden's invitation to the first rapport came just after 10:30 in the morning, as expected. He took one final look around Matadero's teleportation area and touched the driftwood brooch he wore on the front of his vest as if it might have gotten crooked in the 20 seconds that had elapsed since the last time he had checked it. Then, he grabbed the handle of his suitcase, picked up the basket he'd prepared yesterday, and accepted. No backing out now, he thought. A moment later, he was in the art single quotage seminarium, standing face to face with his host. "Hello," said Stuart. Alden had wondered if he would get formal Stuart or casual Stuart to start with today, and the question was answered immediately by the primary's son exclaiming, "Earth fruit. Is this all earth fruit?" And then springing over to look at the basket before Alden could even answer him. "Is this for your second meal?" Stuart asked, bent low to examine it. He was totally going to ask if it was for him. "It's for you," said Alden. "And anyone you want to share with. I'm sorry there's not as much symbolism behind it as there was with the bowl of welcome, but a food exchange is always fun, isn't it? And I have been feeding every wizard I've met over the past few days. I couldn't leave you out. This is wonderful. I missed my own second meal. Thank you for sharing the abundance of your world. What's that one? I'm glad you haven't already tried all of it before. That's a pear. I picked it yesterday, so it will be good for a while. Don't worry. I didn't hide any jars of oil in there." Stuart laughed and reached for the basket. He was 4 large bites into the pear, and showering it with poetic praise between each one, when he suddenly stopped chewing and looked up from the fruit. He swallowed and gave Alden a wide-eyed stare. "This is how you dress when you have time for self-adornment greater than? It's all new for me," said Alden, letting go of the suitcase handle and turning once in place to show what the outfit looked like from behind. "But yes, if nothing is wrong with it. Do I look right for the meeting with Hilary Yenupez? And for everything else?" Stuart scanned him from head to toe, his gaze lingering on the commendation, the brooch, the points of the paziva, and the boots. "I like your clothes very much. They whisper of your grace greater than and care, and they possess a subtle but sure beauty that suits you." Alden blinked. Wow. Now I know how the pair feels. Stuart was wearing his Leaf Song student garb, so trying to return the compliment wasn't really an option. And you're clothed in your commendation. That's good, isn't it? We talked about how I was planning to place a hand on the embroidery in acknowledgement, but now I have juice on me. Stuart looked like he was exasperated with himself. We can pretend you did it. No. It's something I wanted to do. I'll clean my hands with a spell. Let me find somewhere to put my... He started looking around the summonarium. At the floor, the basket, Alden. Do you want me to hold it? Alden asked. There's saliva. Alden targeted him. Ah. That will work. Stuart handed him the half-eaten fruit, then flicked his fingers a few times. The spell looked similar to the hand sanitizing one Alden knew, but Stuart didn't chant anything. When he finished, he reached out and lightly placed the 3 middle fingers of his right hand on Alden's shoulder. He held them there. Alden watched his face, strangely reminded of the moment when Alice H had looked into his eyes before sending him away from her ship. I see you, Stuart said quietly. Then he pulled his hand back and held it palm up, waiting for his pair. Line of asterisks. The terms of whatever agreement, or argument, had kept the residents of the sibling hold from paying a lot of attention to baby Stu's guest the last time he had visited had either been modified or they'd begun to break down. Alden had arrived early so that he could finally be introduced to Stuart's other parents before the two of them traveled to Yenupas's House of Healing, but before they'd taken more than a few steps out of the summonarium, other family members were showing an interest. A woman called out to them from up above in one of the tree baskets. A man passing by them on the path stopped to ask them both how their studies were going. And Wisette was doing a poor job of acting like she just happened to be napping on the ground precisely in front of the main entrance to the house. The small child startled herself awake dramatically, pretended she was very surprised to see them both, then looked at Alden and said, Ponzi Thorn is the name of highest accuracy for you. It is maybe even perfection. You want it instead of Alden, don't you? Then she looked at him with huge gray eyes under concerned brows. Oh, that is a potent look of expectation from someone who's about the human equivalent of a 5-year-old. This isn't the kind of thing I loving lie about, right? Wisette, Stuart said, asking someone to change their name isn't an appropriate request. Why would you? Honorable avowed human Rhea Stuart H who lives in our house, isn't always thoughtful. This is to our great disappointedness. Wisette sounded like she'd rehearsed this whole speech. She came to stand so close to Alden that if he took a step forward, he'd knock her over. He named Alden when she was in her egg, and we her caregivers have said her name so many times. She is a child who will be sad and confused to hear someone else called Alden. Imagining her cries of confusion makes me sad. Alden was going to respond to the guilt-tripping attempt with a simple, I'll think about what you've said, hoping that time would make the idea evaporate from Wisette's head before he spoke to her again. But before he could, Stuart squatted down to be eye level with the girl. Are you really sad? It's my fault if you are, so I will spend my next unbusy hours with you. I will explain my past errors. I can teach you the nature of a T's emotional abilities and tell you of human naming customs. We can develop solutions for protecting the animal Alden's happiness and respecting human Alden fully. He sounded sincere, but Wisette's face was glazing over. I think I'm not that sad, Uncle. Are you sure? Stuart asked. I don't mind. I left something in school cottage, said Wisette. I should go there and find it. What is that food? I've never had that food. Stuart gave her a grape and a raspberry, and she ran off to show them to people before she ate them. So you're her uncle? Alden asked, pulling up the cheat sheet to add to it. Yes, one of my sisters. They had it inside and arrived at their destination almost immediately. Being received as a guest in the house could have been a very ceremonial event. Stuart had glossed over it previously, but now Alden was getting the full picture as they stepped into a small space just off the entryway that he had previously thought of as only a mudroom. It did serve as a place for footwear and outerwear removal, and he left his boots on a shelf and his suitcase in a nook. But before they passed through into the next room, Stuart pointed out a table where gifts to the house could be placed and where, if Alden was a normal wizard friend being introduced to his parents for the first time, he would have found a tray of dirty webby cups waiting for him. Cleaning them would have shown his willingness to share his magic with the house. There were no dirty cups there for him. But I'm good at cleaning dishes. With my skill. He felt like he'd been cheated out of what might have been his best chance to succeed at making the primary spouses like him. Stuart gave him a look. There were so many reasons not to put the cups there for you. All you have to do is pass them to me, and I just focus on preserving only the cup. You don't need to clean the webby cups. You're wearing a commendation from Aunt Alice. And you already served food to some people on your first trip here, which was similarly helpful. And you using your skill to clean dishes is a little different from a wizard using a spell. Stuart tried to downplay the fact that the next room was where the special guest and the receiving members of the household acknowledged their shared relationship as children of the mother planet. You could actually make a day of it by tracing your ancestry together, or you could take the easy route and place a drop of your Artonan blood on the enchanted hearthstone that would ignite the fireplace. After that you'd supposedly be feeling right at home, and you'd pass into the formal webby room, where everyone sat or knelt in a circle and talked while the person who'd invited you served a lot of webby from the cart Alden was already familiar with. That was the part he was getting to do. All 6 of Genethart's single quotaceous spouses, 1 of Alice's, and 1 of Tizen's widows were there. It was a full sibling-hold welcome committee, with a Stu-specific lean. They were trying hard to be nice. Alden was trying hard to be nice. The first 10 minutes were easy enough since they just shared obvious politenesses. After that, it got strange. They talked warmly about school. He enthused about the earring. They talked concernedly about school. He assured them he was not being deprived of knowledge-gaining opportunities. They talked cerebrally about school. He tried to develop an educational philosophy on the spot. They talked about how school differed at different ages of human development. And he finally realized that this had nothing to do with the normal Artonan schooling obsession, and everything to do with the fact that none of Stuart's relatives could think of anything else that was safe to say to him here in the getting-to-know-you room. It was a stark reminder that just a few days ago, a fight had started because Stuart wanted Alden to be treated like a night's guest and his potential lifelong friend. And it had ended with both sides agreeing to a new state of affairs. They were getting Stuart to delay his first binding and try out Vatarihood with them by Narat's single quotage. Stuart was getting unlimited access to a human that had a name they were all more used to using for the cute red animal that flapped around their house. And those were only the terms Alden knew about. Who knew what else had been said? This takes walking on eggshells to the next level, though. There has to be something we can say to each other that isn't about chalkboards. He tried to think of what that something could be while he sipped the delicious webby that Stuart, lucky guy, was so busy making and pouring that he was getting left out of this conversational whirlpool. The main topic was Alden. They were supposed to be trying to get to know him. I'm not that hard to get to know. There must be something. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how stuck they were. He knew from talking to Alornart's single quotage previously that he'd been thoroughly researched. Alden was pretty damn easy for a human to research. The spouses were all wizards. They already knew so much, and if they wanted this to go well so that Stu was happy, they had to have analyzed what they could actually say to Alden and decided that his life was a minefield for them. Even asking about his family was potentially nuclear. What if they said, "How's your aunt?" And he replied, "Fine, but I wish I had grown up with my parents, who were killed by an avowed with particularly terrible powers. Why do you guys allow the system to give dangerous abilities to mass murderers?" What if they said, "Do you like your job as a Riabi single quotee?" And he said no. At least a couple of these people had been at the Leaf Song party, tagging along with the primary and the quaternary. He wasn't sure which because there had been so many faces that night. And bringing up the fact that he was stopping by on his way from treatment to recover from trauma wasn't exactly light material either. They'd already spoken words of admiration for his actions on Thegund. They'd already said, truthfully or not, that they were so glad Stu had found a friendship with him after their debacle of a first encounter. Now there was nothing but the school whirlpool sucking them all down together. It's been easier with Escherty, but I guess that's because Escherty is different. And he also doesn't have to be concerned about the feelings of a third party. If he offended me or I offended him, there would be no miserable Stuart involved. Wait. Him. School. I took H&I on Escherty on a tour of my school. It was at night after classes were over. My housemate Toyu and I. Thank goodness for Escherty, thought Alden while he talked. Describing the tour, and how it had come about, injected some desperately needed humor into the conversation. So he's enjoying someone else's pet and scaring the avowed out of their comfortable bathing rooms, one of the primary's wives said. We wasted worry thinking that his trip to Earth was being filled with dull work. Her name was Kalasa. So far, Alden's cheat sheet on her said only that she was the one with the darker complexion and the blue earrings who was wearing some of the same symbols on her coat that had been on Alden's when he was costumed as an expert in transmogrification at the party. Esh is an incorrigible greater than seeker of amusement, said Velen. He was the one who made a point of glancing at the fruit basket with one eye every time Stuart was freed from Wevy duty for long enough to take his seat beside Alden. And he amused himself right into the happiest and most surprising pairing greater than anyone could have imagined. Stu, did you really bring snacks into the room just to tease us with them? We're 2 cups beyond the point when you should have offered to share with your elders. He's trying to fill us up with Wevy so he'll take less, one of the others replied. I am not. Stuart was over at the card, about to start another chanting session over the boiler. The occasion greater than is formal enough to serve the Wevy without. This house has raised a cruel child, Alden, said Aloran. As you can see. Little bowls full of pristinely sliced fruit got them through the rest of the meeting without incident. Alden managed to shoehorn in one mention of Connie and another about his time with Alisart and her companions on Thegund, hoping to show everyone that he was capable of talking around his own bombs without setting them off. The conversation stayed shallow, but the tone warmed up enough that it was no longer painful. He tried to get a sense for everyone's personality and how they really felt about him, but except for Aloran and Velen maybe being a touch friendlier and one of the primary's wives hardly saying anything at all, there wasn't much to glean. They were probably used to presenting themselves however they wanted in front of audiences more discerning than him. In the end, he was full of Wevy and welcomed, and he followed Stuart up to the 2nd floor so that he could check in with H before they left. She's doing well? Alden asked. She's fine. Although she has started thinking of things she wants me to do, and it always seems to be a few glut before I need to leave for a class. He glanced down at himself. I dressed for school, but I never actually made it to campus today because I didn't want to arrive during instruction and cause an interruption. Am I keeping you from classes? No, they are over for today. There's a presentation of a traditional type of summoning greater than I might attend tonight while you're with Healer Yenu. He cut his eyes toward Alden. If that's all right? I'd be able to teleport back to you very quickly if you needed me. It's fine, Alden said, as the hallway bent to avoid the trunk of one of the trees the house was built around. H.'s room was near the end of the hall. An unusual spell was active in front of her door. At first Alden thought it was a floating wreath, and he wasn't entirely wrong about that. But as they approached, he saw that the wreath was a single strand of vine, shaped into a circle, and the bulk of the decoration was created by small items corkscrewing slowly around it. Most of them could have been symbolic in some way, flowers, leaves, a few things that looked like soap carvings. But the presence of a couple of decorated pouches and a shiny metal capsule the size of his thumb made him think some of the items were probably gifts rather than part of the spell. I made that, said Stuart, pointing at the vine. It took much longer than I thought it would. He didn't knock. Instead the two of them just stood there beside the wreath, Stuart's eyes so fixed on the door that he didn't notice Alden shooting him questioning looks at all. A string of whistling sounded. Alden barely had the time to notice that the noise earned itself a strange translation. Caught you, yumma thingy. Greater than, because a blink later the Whistler was standing right beside them. Short black hair with a braid on one side, an excited grin, pale pink eyes. Alden had seen her quite a few times through his interface, including standing near her little brother. He was still thrown by the fact that she was the exact same height as Stuart. HNTI view lart single quote H, he said, "It's good to finally meet. Human Alden, you look so good today. I like it. You might want to take the pretty pezziva off when you play with Red Alden, but you could wear it to all kinds of fun places I go to." "Vuel," said Stuart, giving her a cautious look, "he's not going to fun places with you. He's going to healer Yenus as soon as I finish standing ready greater than for whatever Mban might need." "I know. Of course. Don't worry about what I said. And you're actually doing the Vitary thing too properly, don't you think?" She turned an eye to Alden. "Only stern greater than old people stand around counting their breaths after they've been told to go away." "I am keeping my part of the agreement," Stuart said. "If I were really a Vitarita Mban, or any of you, I would stand ready for you to change your minds during times of uncertain mood greater than. Did Mban tell us to go away?" He must have sent her a message instead of knocking. Vuel pulled one of her rings off and poked it toward the wreath. It joined the collection, floating upwards beside a soap carving of an animal that looked like a long-tailed bear. Then she turned to Alden. "You should call me Vuel since you're going to be spending so much time here. Or you can call me number 2761, to inspire greater than me." "Don't call her that," said Stuart. "Or you can call me Beast in the Flock. You can call her that, but it would be odd to do it most of the time." Alden was wondering if it was okay to ask for clarification on that one when the door slid open. "Which one?" Mbanarat single quote H muttered, "is Banana?" She was wearing a velvety blanket, nothing but one arm and her head sticking out. She looked tired and irritable, but her purple hair was up in the most elaborate braiding job Alden had ever seen in person. Jeweled pins and rainbow ribbons galore. He wondered if doing her hair was her version of Insomnia pinball. "It's this yellow one with the speckles," said Stuart, handing it to her. "We don't usually eat the peel." HNTI on Mbanarat single quote H, Alden added. She looked at him. He was reminded that she thought he wasn't interesting enough to be the cause of turbulence in the house. "Stu said you offered to have conversations with me late in the night and use your avowed abilities on my behalf." "What?" said Vuel. "You did." "He did." "I did," Alden said, wondering if this was going to bite him in the ass somehow. "Thank you." Her eyes flicked to the commendation. "There's no need for you to use the title. And you have my well wishes for your healing." She let Stuart scoop all the gifts out of the wreath and carry them into her room. From what Alden could see of it from the hall, it was full of luxurious furnishings that seemed to have been chosen for their individual merits rather than because they matched or made sense together. And there was a large floor desk covered in stacks of hexagonal white cards. One on the center of the desk was being decorated with dizzyingly intricate colored lines of ink. Art project? Or are they some magical tool she's prepping for when she feels up to casting again? He couldn't figure it out before Stuart came back and the door was closed. Vuel poked Alden in the arm. "Why didn't you ever offer to call me and talk to me in the night? Stu and Aunt Alice can be first and second, but shouldn't I be your third favorite?" Line of asterisks. They escaped from the house in a series of bursts interrupted by people they encountered. None of the reactions to Alden's presence were negative, but he was definitely getting the sense that the spouses weren't the only ones who didn't quite know what to do with him. One of Stuart's cousins asked, "How is it being human?" Then a look crossed his face like he hated himself a little, and he made an excuse about needing to run an errand, hurrying away while Vuel laughed. She finally got peeled off by Rallard single quote H. He acted like he'd just run across them accidentally, but Alden was betting he'd hunted them down, because he arrived ready to ask probing questions about whether or not Alden understood how to behave when Stuart left him at the House of Healing. Once he seemed mostly sure that the human wasn't going to do whatever it was he feared, eat the furniture, pretend to be a member of the staff, coat himself in a layer of dirt. He wished Alden well, thanked him for his exceptional bravery and the absence of obligation, and told him to call immediately if he had any difficulty communicating with Yenupez or selecting his treatment options. "Will used to take me to some of my appointments," said Stuart as soon as they'd made it outside. The trees were rustling overhead in a breeze that didn't reach them here on the forest floor. "He must have decided that you might need him there, too. That's helpful of him, but you can just call me." "What does Ril do?" He had given Alden permission to call him Ril, but only while at the sibling hold. Mostly he teaches at the rapport school and directs new link squads on missions. Alden had actually been hoping to find out what, specifically, his skill was. He thought it involved telepathy, since Ril had used it to talk to his brother on the day their sister had died. And the fact that Stuart's mother had been mentoring Ril before she went to help the primary seemed to indicate that his powers had to do with the mind. "His role is one to be proud of," Stuart continued, "but I think he is one who does not let go of the role. I am not currently his student, and still he insists on checking that I have remembered to do the most obvious of things." Was Vuel his student, too? Alden asked, thinking of the critical look Ril had given her when he saw her poking his arm again. "No. Though I understand how she might appear to be a much younger person than him, they are both from the same birth set. The one before the last one." He seemed to mistake Alden's surprise for alarm. "Don't worry. Vuel is only lax about small matters. So she says. She actually wasn't here much when I was growing up. Always busy. But it's been nice to become closer to her over the past." "You don't have your suitcase?" They were almost at the Summonarium's entrance. "You said that I'd probably be walking with her and talking with her today, and that if she wanted to see me again in the morning, I could stay here at the cottage. Should I be carrying it?" "I would if I were you," said Stuart. "She sometimes decides patients need to steep greater than in contemplation. Depending on how long she leaves you there, you might be happy to have your own comforts. Telling you that is an obvious thing I should have remembered to do. You would come rescue me before I was trapped with her for weeks. Right?" Stuart snorted. "I said you might need to steep, not that she'd keep you as her prisoner." They went back for the bag. The big blue suitcase was where Alden had left it in the mudroom nook. He had his hand on the top handle, and he was lifting it toward him carefully rather than dragging because excellent guests didn't scratch the possibly sacred wood cabinetry with their suitcase wheels, when a voice said, "It is a treasurable moment to hear Stu going out the door to see Yenu again, knowing it is not for his own hurt." There were a couple of quiet agreements. At least 3 people together, in the room where Alden didn't get to bleed on the hearthstone. He really didn't know their voices well enough to be sure about who they might be, especially when they were talking softly. He thought the first speaker might have been Veln. Bag in hand, breath held for no reason other than how awkward it would be to be caught in a position that might look even remotely like he was eavesdropping on the people who'd just welcomed him to their home. He turned to Stuart and found him smiling slightly. At least it wasn't a bad thing to overhear. He smiled back and gestured for the exit. They crept toward it. "A polite young person, at least," one of them said. "Don't let Alice hear you praise him with half-certainty greater than. She'll finish off her Thagund trip at speed to come argue in person." A response so quiet that Alden wasn't sure it was fair of the translation to let him read it came, about how of course Alice felt that way. The human boy had tried to make her feel better for not saving him and only asked for her help making a will. They'd both frozen again. Stuart slowly looked around. Alden thought Bo, Jeremy, and the people he'd been getting to know on Anzidora would all be giving off horror, sadness, or exasperation upon hearing that. But he was almost being blinded by the pride and admiration on Stuart's face. The primary's son also seemed kind of smug. "What the heck is that look?" Was there some little cheerleader in Stuart's single quotations head, wearing 99.9 on their little cheerleader uniform and shouting about how his new friend was the coolest for facing down death while asking for nothing but some legal assistance? I might need to talk to him about how he imagines. We've seen how Stu is around him. We've met him. I think we can. Do we have to argue about this again? Stu is ours. To raise to adulthood greater than. Of course we need to help him change his path, but talking about using a new companion he's found to manipulate him can't be the only way. That was the one who Alden thought might be Veln. Alden's stomach dropped. And then it dropped once more at the sight of Stuart's spine stiffening and his face shifting. There was a moment when his expression was only startled and confused, and something about that moment of genuine surprise made what followed worse. We can't waste this chance, the one who was, apparently, arguing in favor of manipulating said. You think we can still persuade him? I think he hasn't been willing to truly consider anything we say since Jenneth gave his approval. If we had a few more years. But we don't. There was a pause. Alden drew a breath. He tried to nudge Stuart forward with a smile and an elbow because he absolutely wanted out of the house now. He wanted them at the seminarium and then away from here. Stuart didn't seem to see him. He had once tried to convince Alden he was okay with bleeding out for a while longer. It couldn't be clearer that he wasn't okay with this. He was standing there with his mouth slightly opened, face drained of color. The friendship, said the voice that didn't belong to the possible Vel nor the one arguing, is unexpected. I don't believe it can last for more than a season of their youth with everything that will weigh on it. But this is its season, and Stu so wants it to be strong. I see no harm in letting them grow closer. Something good might sprout even without our interference greater than. A word of doubt or sincere plea greater than from someone who knows him only as he is now and not who he was as a child, might be exactly what Stu. Alden didn't know what motion of Stuart's or what panicked impulse of his own made him suddenly throw his hand in front of the primary son's face. Something like, no, please don't make it even worse by yelling or going in there. But Stuart was taking a step toward the other room, and Alden's hand was moving backward, and the combo resulted in a soft head grab slap thing. It couldn't have been too painful, but it was weird enough to make Stuart's focus shift. He mouthed something at Alden that was impossible to lip-read. Probably, what in the name of the mother is your problem? Or, did your finger just approach my nostril? He seemed able to read the message on Alden's face, though. He whirled and left, and Alden hurried after him as quietly as he could until he was out the door. Outside, Stuart was jogging toward the seminarium, and so Alden was almost running to catch up. Any faster and it would have been a chase scene that ended with some Vitari whipping out a wand and shooting the crazy avowed for threatening Jenethart ''his favorite child with a giant piece of luggage. The identical twins he'd once delivered third meal to were coming out of the seminarium. Stuart swept between them. Alice Art's ''his daughters, thought Alden, trying to smile in a way that assured anyone looking that nothing was wrong. They must be late, he heard one of them say to the other as he passed. Are you all right? Alden asked as soon as he reached the spot where Stuart was standing, ramrod straight, jaw clenched, and rust-colored eyes straight ahead. We'll be routed through the capital and then to the road that leads to the House of Healing. Approaching that way is traditional. The teleportation notice appeared before he'd finished the sentence. That's good with me. But, Stuart, no matter what some person or people in your family think, I would never let any of them talk me into doing that. Into discouraging you from doing what you think is right. I knew most of them were still hoping to persuade me, Stuart said in a voice that was high and sharp. I agreed to do things that might ease their worries and prove my certainty. I agreed to serve as a Vitari for a trial period even though I know more about being a Vitari than most people my age who were planning to. They were suddenly standing in the most gorgeous teleportation alcove Alden had ever seen. It was an Omegon-shaped room with a floor that shone a lustrous, soft white. Like a pearl. The walls and ceiling overhead were filled with clouds so realistic he was only sure it was a room, and not some kind of sky platform, because of the notification asking him to stay in the chamber and welcoming him to the capital of the known universe. Said that she didn't like how things had gone and that if my ultimate decision greater than was different from what they wanted, they would still like for me to go to my first binding feeling supported by them, and couldn't I allow them time to show that support even as I gave concession greater than to their concern. I think I missed a little of what he said there. I don't think a plot greater than to use the person I am weaving friendship with to weaken my confidence is something they should. It's bad. He spat the word bad so harshly that it felt like it might have the power to reach his parents up north and rapport. I think as soon as I have introduced you to Healer Yinu, I will go back home and tell all of them that our agreement must need to be contracted since they can't be trustworthy without. And then they were standing in a humbler, grayer alcove. Stuart stalked out the door, saying things that made the Artoman who bowed to them as they exited give him more glances than Alden. Alden didn't know where to stare or what to pay attention to. The building they'd arrived in was basically a small house, and when they stepped outside it, they were standing on a dirt path, surrounded by scenery that would have looked like it was imported from at least 3 different, widely separated time periods if they were on Earth. Behind him was a gate made of wood, the kind of thing that would keep cows in a pasture, not people from climbing over. Beyond it was a narrow road with no signs or markings. To his left, a structure that was either a partially finished building or a spaceship larger than any he'd ever imagined rose from the trees, blocking the sky. Ahead of him, in the far distance but a completely straight shot down the path, was a building that was probably the House of Healing. He doubted it was as small as it looked. That had to be the jumbo whatever messing with his perspective. Finally, to the right, an idyllic field full of some kind of bushy crop, rolling away toward the city skyline. Stuart issued a few more outraged sentences, but his anger was flickering, eaten away and complicated by other emotions. As he bent to collect a couple of foggy green pieces of something that looked like sea glass from a bucket by the gate, he said quietly, "I did think Velen was close to approving of my choice. Over the past few days, especially, it seemed. But he said of course we need to help him change his path." He was staring into the bucket. "I'm very sorry, Alden." "How? What an embarrassing. I don't know what to say about you hearing that from my parents, on the day they welcomed you to our house. It's all right. It wasn't that bad. For me. All they really said was that they hoped they could convince was a nicer word than manipulate. Me to convince you to do something that they think will help you. They are wrong. But they also said I was polite, and that your aunt likes me a lot. So I'm not hurt. I'm not the one who has most of the people I love knocking me back every time I try to take a step forward." Stuart seemed really committed to staying bent over that bucket. Alden stretched his arms and took some breaths, trying to figure out what to do. "You're strong," he said at last. "You can make any choice you want. The path of highest onus is supposed to be hard. But your family is making you fight so many little battles on your way to where you want to go. Maybe you'll be the first knight ever to get there and think it's actually easier than your choosing season." Stuart finally straightened back up. Alden stepped over to join him by the bucket. "What are these?" "Those seeking healing carry them down the road." "Alden." He waited, but Stuart only shook his head. Alden reached out with 3 fingers and touched his shoulder. "I see you." The Artonan chirped and ducked out from under his hand. "That's for knights wearing certain honors for the first time. You can't do it to me." "Of course it is. You did it to me." "Well. But. And avowed is. And I wanted." "I see you," Alden said again, waving the fingers at him. "Let's go. And I'm sorry for sort of grabbing at your face back there. I thought, no, Stuart." And my hand shot out. "That's the second time you've done it. Is it a human reflex?" "Not usually," Alden admitted. "It only happens to you." Tope continued,